Now, Turkey is expressing concern about the escalation in fighting in Myanmar that's forced tens of thousands to flee. It's calling on the junta and rebel groups to respect international law and to protect civilians. Now, one of the groups that the military is fighting is called the Arakan Army. Formed in 2009, it's based in Rakhine State and is believed to have between 15,000 and 30,000 fighters. It wants autonomy for Buddhist Arakans in Rakhine, which is also home to tens of thousands of predominantly Muslim Rohingya. Well, the United Nations says about 45,000 Rohingya have been forced from their homes since fighting between the military and rebel groups began back in November. Many of them have fled across the border to Bangladesh. Some reports accuse the Arakan Army of carrying out an arson campaign against the minority Rohingya. Well, let's speak to our correspondent Tanvir Chowdhury. He joins me now from the banks of the Naf River. That's on the Bangladesh-Myanmar border. Tanvir, can you describe the situation for us on that border right now?
Yes, right behind me is the Naf River, and there's a lot of mountains and hills. You can't see it because of extreme weather right here, torrential rain, as well as it's very cloudy. And beyond that area is a conflict zone, Rakhine. There's been intense fighting between the Buddhist Rakhine Rebel Army and the Myanmar Army. Within the last 6-7 months, there's been intense fighting. Even till yesterday, there was people in the local area said they could hear machine gun and mortar shell. And within this area are a lot of these Rohingya who fled the northern Rakhine area, taking shelter, and they're wanting to come to Bangladesh. Some of them made it to the refugee camp, but others were not allowed. Bangladesh has a strict guideline on border patrol as well as Coast Guard that not to let anybody in. It is not willing to accept any more Rohingyas. It said it is up to the international community to take care of them. Now, according to UN, we know 45,000 people have been displaced. Talking to some of the Rohingyas who fled here and those in northern Rakhine, they said the houses have been burned by both sides, the Myanmar army as well as the Arakan Rebel Army. And their forcefully recruited men and young boys have been recruited by the both sides and the cross in between. If they don't, they said, we'll burn your villages and we'll throw you out of the villages. So a lot of them people are taking shelter in a really barren land in the jungles, without food, without shelter. There's no aid agencies, there's no government there. It's a conflict zone. And these people are now on the brink of starvation unless there's some sort of international effort to save them. As it is, they can't cross. Whoever made it here is illegally by boat or by land border, but they can legally cross into Bangladesh right now.
And as you can see there, it's pretty wet where Tanvir is. We understand that there is an approaching cyclone too, which is only going to make things worse. We'll leave it there for now, but stay across that for you here on Al Jazeera. Tanvir Chowdhury there for us on the Myanmar-Bangladesh border. Well, we can dig into this a little more with David Mathieson. He's an independent analyst who specialises in conflict and human rights in Myanmar. He joins us now from Chiang Mai in Thailand. David, there have been reports, as we've been hearing, of abuse, mass arson, even, I understand, beheadings. Are we seeing the targeting of the Rohingya here, or are they, as some are reporting, being caught in the crossfire between the military and the Arakan Army?
Well, as best we can understand it, I think both things are actually happening. They are being caught in the crossfire because the fighting is so intense between the Arakan Army and the Myanmar military and security forces. But it seems as if both sides are actually targeting civilians in Butidang, and that both sides have been engaging in arson attacks and targeting civilians with the intent of driving them out. And so I think it's really quite another chapter of a dreadful situation for the Rohingya in Butidang and in that part of Rakhine State. But it's also important to remember that all the civilians in the area are being targeted by the Myanmar army, and all communities are actually suffering.
Can you explain a little bit of the background here when it comes to the Arakan Army? Because they're made up of ethnic minorities fighting the government, mostly, as we've been reporting, the Buddhist Rakhine. But they themselves have been targeting another ethnic minority, the mainly Muslim Rohingya. It also seems that the military is reportedly encouraging this kind of development of communal violence.
Absolutely. And, what we've seen in the past 15 years of the Arakan Army's resistance struggle, over the past 4 or 5 years, the tempo of the fighting has actually gone way up, and it's certainly intensified since November. And the Arakan Army is probably at the closest point of capturing pretty much all of Rakhine State, including Butidang and Mongdor. And we've seen large parts of the Myanmar military actually collapse and surrender in these areas. Over the past several years, even though there have been some pretty terrible episodes, by and large, the Arakan Army has not targeted the Rohingya population. And a lot of the racist sentiments that might still exist there were kind of kept very on the back burner. And what we've seen in the past few weeks is this intensification of messaging from the Arakan Army leadership, whose leader has been issuing some really quite disturbing racist tweets, and forces on the ground seeming to actually target Rohingya for forced conscription and forced labour and what can only be described as ethnic cleansing, forcing them out of Buthinam. But we've also seen the Myanmar military forcibly recruiting and deploying large numbers of Rohingya, some of whom have actually joined voluntarily the military, the very military that targeted them several years ago in 2017. So it's an incredibly confused and distressing situation.
You talk about how much headway the Arakan Army has made in trying to create this autonomous state that they've been essentially fighting for years. What would that actually mean for the Rohingya?
Well, there's a great deal of uncertainty there, and I think that the Arakan Army was trying to actually bring as many Rohingya into their civilian administration that they could in the past several years, as their civilian administration followed their military strategy. Including apparently Rohingya magistrates and other administrators. Not too sure exactly the extent of how successful that was, but it certainly appeared as if the Arakan Army was going to show the Rohingya a lot more acceptance and a lot more inclusion in the future. But I think those assumptions need to be revisited, and we really need to start thinking what the future of the Rohingya would be in Rakhine State. If and when the Arakan Army actually achieves total victory. And that's for the Rohingya who are still left in Rakhine State, and also the 1 million who are in Bangladesh and that Bangladesh wants to go home. So I think it's a very uncertain future for the Rohingya.
David Mathieson, they're an independent analyst who specialises in Myanmar. Thank you very much for joining us on the Al Jazeera News Hour, David.
Make sure to subscribe to our channel to get the latest news from Al Jazeera.